I found out my wife was cheating for 20 years, so I destroyed her life in the most satisfying way. Hello, read it. There are moments in life that are so defining, so utterly devastating, that they carve themselves into your soul. Not with the sharp precision of a knife, but with the slow, grinding force of something inevitable, something you never saw coming until it was too late. I never imagined my life would be torn apart in an instant, not after years of stability, of routine, of believing I had built something unshakable. But that's the cruelest thing about betrayal. It never announces itself. It doesn't come with warning signs or flashing lights. It seeps in silently, poisoning everything you thought was real until one day you wake up and realize you've been living in a carefully constructed lie. My name is Mark Bennett, and I am 48 years old. I have spent 20 years married to a woman I thought I knew, a woman I loved, a woman I built a life with. If you had asked me a month ago about my marriage, I would have told you it was solid. Not perfect. No marriage ever is, but steady, strong, built on mutual trust and understanding. Olivia and I had been together for so long that I had stopped questioning things. I had stopped looking for cracks, for hidden truths, because I had no reason to. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But trust is a fragile thing. It doesn't break with a single blow. It erodes, slowly, quietly, until one day, you realize there's nothing left holding it together. I met Olivia when I was 25. She was vibrant, full of life, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately draw people toward her. She had a warmth about her, a charm that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she spoke to you. I fell hard and fast. Within 2 years, we were married, and from the outside, we had the perfect life. We built a home, a future, something that felt permanent. I worked hard to provide for us, spending long hours at the office, pushing myself to climb the corporate ladder so that we would never have to struggle. And Olivia, she was always supportive, always there with a smile, always making our house feel like a home. Looking back, I wonder if that was my first mistake, believing that the version of her I knew was the only version that existed. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't start with suspicion. It starts with trust. It starts with the absolute certainty that the person you love would never hurt you. That's what allows it to thrive, to go unnoticed. I never questioned Olivia's loyalty, never doubted her love for me, because I had never been given a reason to. She was affectionate, attentive, present. If she had secrets, she hid them well. But now, as I sit here, replaying every moment, every conversation, every instance where I should have seen something, I realize the signs had always been there. They weren't obvious, not the kind of red flags you read about in cautionary tales. They were small, almost insignificant. A change in her tone when she spoke about certain people. The way she would be unusually quiet on some evenings, lost in thought. The way she always seemed to have plans that I was never part of, excuses that made sense at the time, but now feel like carefully rehearsed lines in a script I never knew I was part of. I never thought I would be the kind of man who ignored the obvious, but maybe that's exactly who I was. The realization came on a Saturday, a regular day, the kind that should have passed without consequence. Olivia had invited some of her friends over for lunch, as she often did. I had no real interest in their conversations, their laughter filling the house as I worked in my home office. The door was slightly open, not because I was listening, but because I had never had a reason to be wary before. And then it happened. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some explosive confession. It was a simple, offhand comment, something said in a quiet voice, something that should have been insignificant. But the moment I heard it, something inside me shifted. At first, it didn't register. It was just words, floating in the air, blending into the background noise of their conversation. But then, as my mind processed them, something inside me turned ice cold. My stomach tightened, my hands stilled over the keyboard, and I realized they were talking about me. I don't remember much of what was said after that. The world around me faded, my heartbeat loud in my ears. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at something dark and endless, something I couldn't escape. My mind raced, trying to grasp at logic, at reason. There had to be an explanation. This had to be a misunderstanding. But deep down, I already knew. I didn't react right away. That was the strangest part. There was no immediate anger, no explosion of rage. Just silence. A slow, creeping numbness that spread through me like poison. I sat there, staring at the wall, my mind replaying the last 20 years of my life, sifting through memories that now felt tainted, rewriting my own history with the truth I had just uncovered. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It wasn't a fleeting lapse in judgment. It had been going on for years, and I had never known. I walked out of the house, my movements mechanical, my thoughts jumbled and incoherent. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to be anywhere but there. I could hear Olivia's voice from the kitchen, laughing, talking, unaware that the world she had built was seconds away from collapsing. I didn't confront her. Not yet, because I needed to know how deep this lie went. I needed to see the full extent of the damage before I decided how to burn it all down. The weight of realization didn't fade after I stepped outside. If anything, it grew heavier, pressing down on me like a suffocating force I couldn't escape. The cold air did nothing to steady my hands, and the laughter from inside felt distant, like a warped echo from another life. It was surreal, sitting there on the front steps of my own house, feeling like a stranger in a place that was supposed to be mine. Olivia was inside, carrying on as if nothing had changed, as if the foundation of our marriage hadn't just cracked wide open. But for me, everything had changed. The certainty I had about my life, my marriage, my wife, it was all unraveling before my eyes. And the worst part was, I didn't even know the full extent of the betrayal yet. For 20 years, I had trusted Olivia without question. I had believed in her, in the life we had built together. I had worked long hours to provide for us, to give us security, to ensure that our future was comfortable. I never once doubted that she was faithful, never once considered that I was being deceived. Now looking back, I wondered if I had been blind or just willfully ignorant. Were there signs I had ignored? Had there been nights where something fell off, but I dismissed it as stress or exhaustion? Had Olivia ever given me a reason to suspect her, and I simply refused to see it? The thought made my stomach twist. I needed proof. I couldn't confront her without it. I couldn't just rely on the fragments of conversation I had overheard, the whispered comments between her and her friends. If I was going to do this, if I was going to rip apart my own marriage, I needed something undeniable. I forced myself to stand, inhaling sharply as I re-entered the house. The warmth inside felt artificial now, suffocating. The scent of Olivia's perfume, the familiar layout of the furniture, the framed pictures on the walls. It all seemed tainted, like I was seeing my home through different eyes. My presence barely registered to Olivia and her friends as they continued chatting in the kitchen. Their laughter rang out, light-hearted, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Olivia's purse was sitting on the dining table, her phone partially sticking out. I had never checked her phone before, had never felt the need to. But now, I saw it as a lifeline to the truth. My pulse pounded as I grabbed it, my hands steady despite the turmoil inside me. The screen lit up. Locked. 6 digits. I swallowed hard. She wasn't reckless. If she had been hiding something for years, she wouldn't make it easy to find. But Olivia was also sentimental. She didn't use complicated passwords. She relied on things that mattered to her. Without hesitating, I typed in 120705, our wedding anniversary. The screen unlocked instantly. A bitter taste filled my mouth at the irony of it. The date that was supposed to mark the happiest day of our lives was now the key to unraveling everything. My fingers hovered over the screen before opening her messages. I scrolled through familiar names, family, co-workers, friends, until one stood out. A single letter. Hey, no last name, no identifying details. Just a letter. My chest tightened as I tapped on the conversation. Hundreds of messages. Not affectionate, not overly intimate, but carefully worded. They weren't the kind of text that screamed infidelity at first glance, but they had an undertone of secrecy, of planning. Meetings. Locations. Times when Olivia knew I would be at work. Times when she knew I wouldn't be around. The messages stretched back for years. Not months. Not weeks. Years. Then I saw it. A message from just a few days ago. You sure the house is safe? The response from Olivia was immediate. Yeah, he won't be home. He never is. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My own home. Our home. I had been so convinced that my long hours at work were for us, for our future, while she had been using that time to bring someone else into our bed. The house I had paid for, the life I had built, had been nothing more than a cover for her deception. I felt like the walls were closing in. I scrolled further, desperate to see how deep this went. The same patterns repeated over and over, weeks apart, months apart. Messages about seeing each other when I wasn't around. Mentions of hotels, discreet locations. And the worst part? Olivia had been so sure I would never find out. She had never even bothered to delete the messages. They were right here, as if she knew I would never look, as if she had spent years believing that I was too trusting, too blind, too naive to ever suspect her. That realization hurt more than anything else. I could hear movement in the kitchen, the sound of Olivia's voice carrying through the house. I forced myself to move, to put the phone back exactly where I had found it, to ensure nothing seemed out of place. My hands were steady, but my mind was anything but. I walked back to my office, shutting the door behind me, exhaling slowly as I leaned against the desk. My pulse was loud in my ears, my breathing controlled but shallow. I had proof. There was no more denying it, no more pretending. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some misunderstanding. Olivia had been unfaithful, and not in a fleeting, regrettable way. This had been deliberate, ongoing, calculated. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, replaying our entire marriage in my head. Had it always been like this? Had she ever been faithful? Was there ever a time when I wasn't being deceived? The weight of those questions pressed down on me like a crushing force. I thought about every anniversary we had celebrated, every vacation we had taken, every quiet moment where I had looked at her and believed she was mine. And now I had to wonder if she had ever really been mine at all. A part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to storm into the kitchen and demand answers. But I didn't, because now that I knew, I needed more. I needed to find out who A was. I needed to know exactly how far this had gone, how much of my life had been stolen from me. There was no point in rushing now. Olivia had spent years lying to me. I could spend a few more days uncovering the truth before I destroyed everything. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, knowing that the real battle was only just beginning. I sat in my office for what felt like hours, my mind running in circles, trying to piece together a timeline that I would never fully understand. The weight of it all sat heavy in my chest, pressing down on me like an immovable force. Olivia's affair wasn't some fleeting mistake, some moment of weakness. It was a life she had been living behind my back. The messages I had read were just fragments of something far more intricate, something deeper, something she had never planned for me to see. And the worst part? She had never even been careful. She had been so sure I would never look, never question, never even suspect. I had trusted her so completely that she had never needed to cover her tracks. That realization made my stomach turn. How many nights had I fallen asleep next to her, while she had already planned her next meeting with someone else? How many times had I come home late from work, exhausted, unaware that she had been with another man just hours before? Had she ever felt guilty? Had she ever looked at me across the dinner table and felt even a flicker of remorse? Or had she simply grown so accustomed to the lie that she no longer saw it as deception? I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep my hands from shaking, to think instead of react. Olivia was still in the kitchen, laughing with her friends, carrying on like everything was normal. Normal. That word didn't mean anything to me anymore. What was normal? Our anniversary trips? The birthday surprises? The quiet evenings watching movies together? Had any of it been real? Had she ever loved me? Or had I just been the safe, stable choice while she sought out something else behind my back? I clenched my jaw, exhaling through my nose, forcing myself to stay grounded. I couldn't just react. Not yet. If I confronted Olivia now, she would deny everything. She would gaslight, manipulate, twist the truth into something I couldn't prove. I had seen it before. Not with her, but with people who got caught doing something they weren't supposed to. Deny, deflect, distort. She would act insulted, maybe even cry, and then she would turn it around on me. She would ask why I had gone through her phone, why I'd been spying on her, why I was destroying our marriage with suspicion. No, that wasn't going to happen. I needed to know everything before I made my move. I took a deep breath, pulled out my own phone, and did something I never thought I would have to do. I started digging into my own wife's life. I searched her email, her social media, looking for anything that might give me more answers. Olivia wasn't stupid, but she was comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. And it didn't take long before I found something that made my pulse quicken. She had an alternate email account. I recognized it immediately because I had seen it before, but not in a personal way. It had been linked to an old travel itinerary from years ago, a booking for a solo trip she had taken when I had been too buried in work to join her. At the time, I hadn't thought twice about it. Olivia had always been independent. She had always liked taking occasional getaways with her friends, and I had never questioned it. But now, looking at that email address, I realized I had been a fool. My hands were steady as I reset the password using her phone. It was too easy. Her recovery questions were predictable, things I knew instantly. The name of her childhood pet, the town where she was born. Within minutes, I was in, and what I found made my stomach drop. This email wasn't just a backup account. It was a second life. There were hotel confirmations, airline tickets, restaurant reservations, bank statements that didn't match the ones from our shared accounts. She had been traveling with him. Whoever it was, he wasn't just some random affair, some meaningless fling. This had been going on for years, possibly the entirety of our marriage. And the worst part? She had taken those trips during anniversaries, during weekends we were supposed to spend together, during times when I had been too busy to notice. I gripped the edge of my desk, inhaling sharply, trying to keep the nausea from rising. My marriage had been over long before today. I just hadn't known it yet. I kept scrolling, my fingers tightening around the phone as I searched for him. His name, his face, something to put a real identity to the shadow that had been lurking in my life for decades. And then I found it, an email from just a few months ago. I miss you. I can't wait to see you again. Counting down the days. It was signed with a name I knew, a name that sent a wave of cold, sharp anger through my veins. Adam, not a stranger. Not a random man. A friend. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly, staring at the name on the screen. Adam. Someone I had known for years. Someone who had been around. Someone who had been to our house, had shaken my hand, had asked me about work, about life, about Olivia. Someone who had smiled at me, knowing the entire time that he was sleeping with my wife. It all made sense now. The way Olivia always seemed extra careful around him. Not in an obvious way, but in the way that people who share a secret are careful. The way they never sat too close at gatherings. The way they never spoke too much, as if avoiding too much interaction would keep me from seeing the truth. It had worked. For years, it had worked. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to stay in control. This wasn't just about Olivia anymore. This was a betrayal that had layers, that went deeper than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just my wife lying to me. This was two people who had been part of my life for decades, conspiring behind my back. And now, I knew exactly who I was dealing with. I locked her phone, placed it back exactly where I had found it, and walked back to my office, shutting the door behind me. My hands were steady now. My thoughts were clearer than they had been all day. The anger was there, boiling under the surface, but I wasn't going to let it control me. No, I was going to control this. Olivia and Adam had spent 20 years lying to me. They had built their affair on the foundation of my trust, believing I would never question them. They had underestimated me. And now, it was my turn to decide how this ended. I sat in my office, staring at the screen. Adam's name burned into my mind like a brand I would never be able to erase. My body was still, my breathing measured, but inside, something in me was shifting, hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. It wasn't just Olivia anymore. It wasn't just the betrayal of my wife. This was deeper. This was worse. This was someone I had trusted. Someone who had been a part of my life for years. Someone who had looked me in the eyes while sleeping with my wife behind my back. A strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes after the shock has worn off, and all that's left is a quiet, focused rage. I had spent hours sitting here, picking apart the last 20 years of my life, rewriting memories with the truth I had uncovered. The vacations Olivia had taken alone, the moments of unexplained distance, the subtle tension at dinner parties when Adam was around. It had all been there, hiding in plain sight, and I had never seen it. I felt detached from myself as I reached for my phone, my hands steady now, my thoughts clearer than they had been since this nightmare started. I pulled up Adam's number, staring at it for a long moment. I could call him. I could listen to the lies spill from his mouth, hear his pathetic attempts at denial, his excuses, his apologies. But that wasn't what I wanted. Not yet. I wanted to watch him squirm. Instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. If Adam had been this careful for years, he wasn't going to slip up easily. But I wasn't just some clueless husband anymore. I knew where to look now. His name, his company, his personal email. I searched everything. And it didn't take long before I found exactly what I needed. Adam wasn't as clean as he pretended to be. Buried in old financial records, hidden behind layers of paperwork, I found inconsistencies in his business dealings. He had been skimming off company funds, rerouting money through different accounts, small enough amounts that they might not have raised suspicion, unless someone knew what to look for. But I did, because I had spent years in corporate finance, working with numbers, analyzing patterns. And what I was looking at, it was fraud. I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly, feeling something settle inside me. Adam had spent years betraying me, sneaking around with my wife, believing he was untouchable. But now I had something on him, something that could destroy him just as easily as he had destroyed my marriage. I closed the laptop, my mind already moving 10 steps ahead. I wasn't going to confront Olivia yet. I wasn't going to storm into the living room and demand explanations. I had played the fool for too long. Now, I was going to play the game. I needed to see it for myself. So, I waited. The next day, I pretended like nothing had changed. Olivia went about her morning routine, kissing me on the cheek before heading out, just like she always did. I watched her leave, feeling nothing but disgust. She thought she had me fooled. She thought I was still blind. She had no idea. I took the day off work, calling in with an excuse about not feeling well. Then, I got in my car and started following her. It wasn't hard. Olivia had always been predictable, and today was no different. She drove across town, took the same road she always did, stopped at a coffee shop she had been going to for years. I parked a distance away, watching from my car, my pulse steady, my breath controlled. She wasn't meeting Adam here. Not yet. This was just the beginning of her routine. I followed her as she left, trailing her through the city, keeping a safe distance. And then, after nearly an hour of driving, she pulled into a parking lot of a small boutique hotel on the outskirts of town. I felt nothing. Not shock, not heartbreak, just confirmation. She had done this before. I had seen the reservations in her emails, had read the messages arranging these meetings. But now, I was seeing it with my own eyes. I parked nearby, watching as she got out of her car, checked her reflection in the window, smoothed her hair. Then, she walked inside like it was nothing, like this was normal. Minutes later, another car pulled up. I didn't have to see his face to know who it was. Adam. He stepped out, looking around once before heading inside after her. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. They were inside together, in a hotel room, right now. And the worst part? They weren't worried. They weren't sneaking around in the shadows, afraid of getting caught. They were comfortable. This was just another meeting for them. I exhaled slowly, forcing my heartbeat to stay steady. I wasn't going to react. Not yet. This wasn't about catching them in the act. This wasn't about barging in, causing a scene. That would be too easy. Too simple. I wanted to destroy them properly. I pulled out my phone, took pictures of the hotel, of Adam's car parked outside. Proof. Not that I needed more of it, but I wanted every piece of evidence lined up perfectly. Then, I turned the key in the ignition and drove away. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Adam thought he was safe. He thought his biggest secret was the affair. But he had bigger problems now. His financial fraud was about to become public. I had already drafted an anonymous report detailing his illegal activities, and by tomorrow morning, it would be on the desk of the company's legal department. If I was right, if they investigated and found even half of what I had uncovered, Adam would be finished. And as for Olivia, I wasn't just going to divorce her. I was going to take everything. She had spent years betraying me, lying to my face, making a mockery of our marriage. She had played the role of the perfect wife while sharing my life with another man. And now, she was going to lose the life she had taken for granted. I pulled into our driveway later that night, my expression calm, my heartbeat steady. Olivia was already home, cooking dinner, greeting me with the same warm smile she had always given me. She had no idea that I knew. She had no idea that by this time tomorrow, her entire world would be crumbling around her. I walked into my house that night, knowing it would be the last time I pretended. Olivia stood in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, moving through the space as if she were the same devoted wife she had always pretended to be. The scent of garlic and roasted meat filled the air, the kind of meal she always made when she wanted to make me feel cared for. I watched her for a moment, studying her movements, wondering how many times she had done this. Played the role of the loving wife after spending her afternoon in a hotel room with another man. She turned and smiled at me, the same smile I had fallen for all those years ago, the same smile I now knew meant nothing. I forced myself to return it, feeling nothing but disgust. She had no idea that I had followed her, no idea that I had watched her walk into that hotel, no idea that by the time she woke up tomorrow, her entire world would be falling apart. I sat through dinner, barely tasting the food, barely hearing her talk about her day. It was surreal, watching her act so normal, so comfortable, knowing what I knew. I nodded when I needed to, gave the right responses, let her believe that everything was exactly the same. Because for now it was, but soon, she would understand. Soon, she would know exactly how it felt to have the life she thought was secure ripped out from under her. That night, as Olivia slept beside me, I sent the email. The detailed report on Adam's fraudulent business practices, complete with every piece of financial evidence I had found, was forwarded directly to his company's legal team. I knew they would act fast. A scandal like this wasn't something a corporation ignored. By morning, Adam's world would be crumbling. And as for Olivia, she wouldn't be far behind. I barely slept, my mind running through the steps I had meticulously planned. By the time the sun rose, I was already out of bed, already in motion. I had called my lawyer 2 days ago, and now, with everything I needed in place, I was ready to end this marriage on my terms. When Olivia walked into the kitchen that morning, still groggy, stretching, completely unaware that today was the day her life would change forever, I was waiting. My expression was calm, my voice was even, and when I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, right in front of her, I watched as the sleep faded from her eyes and realization set in. For the first time in years, she was speechless. She stared at the papers, then at me, confusion flickering across her face before she tried to mask it with a forced smile. "What is this?" Her voice was light, almost amused, as if she thought this was a joke. But when she looked into my eyes, her own smile faltered. Because she saw it. She saw the end staring back at her. I didn't give her an explanation. I didn't tell her what I had found, what I knew. I didn't give her the luxury of excuses. I simply told her that it was over, that I was done, that there was nothing left to say. Panic flickered across her face then. She reached for me, but I stepped back. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. "Sign them." My voice was cold, final. She knew me well enough to know that there was no changing my mind. She opened her mouth, then closed it, swallowing hard. She wasn't used to this, not from me. She was used to being in control, used to lying and getting away with it, used to me never questioning her. But now she was the one caught off guard. Now she was the one left scrambling. I left the house before she could gather herself enough to fight back. I didn't need to hear whatever excuses she had prepared. I didn't need to watch her pretend to be the victim. I was done. But the real satisfaction came later. By noon, Adam had been fired. I heard it through mutual acquaintances before I even had to check. The company had launched an internal investigation, and with the evidence I had provided, there was no saving him. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized. He had built his career on fraud, and now it was all coming back to bury him. By the afternoon, Olivia had finally called me. I let the phone ring. Then she called again. And again. I let her sit in the silence. By the evening, her messages changed. At first, they were pleas, asking to talk, to explain. Then they turned to frantic apologies, begging for a second chance. And finally, they became angry, as if she thought she could guilt me into responding. I didn't, because for 20 years, she had made me live in ignorance, believing in a marriage that didn't exist. And now, for the first time, she was the one left in the dark. It didn't take long for everything else to unravel. The divorce moved quickly because I had planned it that way. Olivia had no leverage, no power. I had gathered enough evidence to make sure she walked away with nothing. No house, no financial security, nothing. The life she had taken for granted was gone. And Adam? His wife left him. His career was destroyed. His name was smeared in legal battles that would haunt him for years. The affair that had lasted 2 decades had cost him everything. And I was free. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. For 20 years, I had lived under an illusion, believing in a love that was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. But now, as I walked away from it all, as I left the past behind, I realized that Olivia and Adam had never won. They had spent their entire lives sneaking around, lying, covering their tracks. They had built their relationship on deception, always looking over their shoulders, always afraid of getting caught. That wasn't love. That was a prison. And now, I was the one walking away while they were left standing in the ruins. For the first time in 20 years, I was truly, completely free,